Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow with me, your host, Alistair McConaughey, broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. Broadcasting on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, and to our friends on TikTok. Folks, thank you for everybody who's coming in. Please tell us where you're coming from tonight. Please tell us where you're viewing from, and please wish us a happy Christmas, just as we wish you also a happy Christmas. In this, our 44th show of 2022 and the final show of 2022. We'll be back, of course, after the new year, but this is the final show for 2022. And what a great run of 44 programs we have had. And on this show tonight, we have a great guest coming up at 7:30. It's the Vice Chairman of the Nelson Society, and his name is Chris Brett, and we're going to be talking about cancel culture and about the threat from the politically correct towards our great British heroes here in Glasgow and throughout the United Kingdom. So that's going to be a good 25-minute chat with Chris coming up at the bottom of the hour at 7:30. The All-American Scotsman. We would like to go live together with you, sir, and we're going to sort that out one day. We're going to do that. Not able to do so tonight, but thank you very much for that suggestion. In fact, we'd like to have you as a guest on our show sometime next year. Now, let's see who is in the house tonight. Derek Hart was first in. Says, good evening, Alistair and fellow Unionists around the world. Hope everyone is fine. And Derek's talking about the rewards on our Christmas crowdfunder, crowdfunder.co.uk/AFFG 2023. We'll run through those in a moment, Derek. AR Entertainment says Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and also gives us the greeting in Gaelic. Thank you for that. Hello to Harry from a slightly wet Sussex, and to D. Stanners and Alan Dawes. Good to see you catching up later, Alan. Adam says, hello everyone, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and has got the Gaelic greeting also. Hello to Kat in the house. It's been great being part of the AFFG family this past year. That's lovely to hear, Kat. Thank you very much, and it's been lovely to have you watching and on the show. Great to see Tommy. Hope you're doing well these days, Tommy, and also to Stuart from Elgin. Merry Christmas to you, and Becky from the great British city of Dundee. Adam from Leicestershire, and Polizzi says on TikTok, left or right, up or down, Westminster has failed us. It certainly has been problematic lately, hasn't it? There's no question about that. But like all great British institutions, it can be made better in time. Adam says, what are our opinions on the Gender Recognition Scotland Bill? A terrible day for Scotland, and a bill that's been promoted by people who need help, shall we say, and tragic in many ways to see Scotland fall to such terrible levels. But that's unfortunately the state of the political class at the moment. SNP and especially Greens, but also unfortunately Labour and Lib Dems too were complicit in all of that. Now, we had a giveaway. We had our Christmas giveaway last week, and it was for our Union Jack oven gloves. It was for a patriotic tea towel, and it was for one of our plastic bags altogether. And we're pleased to say the winner of last week's Christmas crowdfunder giveaway was Wally Campbell. So Wally, if you're watching, do contact us. If you don't contact us by email, please, and send us your address so we can get this stuff in the post to you this week. It won't arrive in time for Christmas, unfortunately, but we'll get that to you. And we'll also send you a message as well on Facebook just to make sure that you've seen this. Congratulations, Wally. We've got another crowdfunder giveaway, I should say, this tonight. Another giveaway. Now, to enter a giveaway, all you have to do on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter is please comment, like, and share this broadcast. Comment, like, and share this broadcast, and we will choose a winner, and we'll announce the winner next time we are on the air. And what have we got? What have we got this time for our crowdfunder, for anybody who likes, shares, comments, retweets this broadcast? We have got this amazing, check that out, Naffy tea, 80 tea bags of Naffy tea, nicely patriotically branded to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the NAAFI. Extra points to MD who can tell me what that actually stands for. Along with a Union Jack tea towel, along with all enclosed inside one of our heavy duty Union Jack plastic bags. Okay, that's coming the way to a lucky winner in our next programme on the 4th of January. For anybody who likes, comments and shares this broadcast, please. Stuart says it means Navy, Army, Air Force Institute. Right, got ya. That's what NAFI means. That makes sense. Now, on that, notice some interesting information is that we made a Freedom of Information request to the so-called Scottish misgovernment about back on the 6th of November. And it was because we were very annoyed when we were on Twitter one night and we saw a video, like one of these 1-minute videos, produced by the so-called Scottish misgovernment. And it was promoting separation, promoting the destruction of the United Kingdom, promoting the complete buggeration of our country, quite frankly. And I was so annoyed by that. And I thought, I'm just going to do one of these Freedom of Information requests, if nothing else other than just to annoy them. So I sent a very well put together letter, and I asked, please can you tell me which department of the Scottish Government produced this particular video? How much did it cost overall to produce this particular video? Which department is creating these videos? Because these videos were being created under a new project which the Scottish misgovernment has got called Building a New Scotland. And so I wanted to know what department is in charge of building a new Scotland. And I also wanted to know what is the annual budget for this department which is creating this Building a New Scotland project. And lo and behold, they got back to me. Amazing! Wonders will never cease. There's actually somebody in the Scottish misgovernment that's doing some kind of work other than working to absolutely mess up the United Kingdom. They've actually got somebody who's answering these questions. So I've got the reply here, which we'll just put up on the screen. There's my questions at the top. Which department of the Scottish Government produced this particular video? Response to your request there at the bottom. This video was produced by the Communications Division in Scottish Government. The Communications Division, okay? Second question, how much did it cost overall to produce this particular video? Now this is an interesting answer. Number 2, there has been no spend on producing this video. All social media content in relation to independence has been created in-house by Scottish Government staff as part of their role in communicating government policy. Now, when they say Scottish Government staff, they're meaning civil servants. So civil servants, they are admitting there, are engaged in media content, in producing media content in relation to independence. And they're engaged in doing this as part of their role in communicating government, by which they mean the SNP circus policy. Number 3, the question: which department of the Scottish Government is creating the Building a New Scotland project? 3. The work to prepare the Building a New Scotland prospectus series is being coordinated by the Constitutional Futures Division within the Scottish Government's Constitution and Cabinet Directorate. Oh my goodness, don't they love to give themselves these stupid titles? Big names for small people, basically. The bigger the name, the worse the people promoting, the worse the actual consequences are going to be, right? So it's coordinated by the Constitutional Futures Division within the Scottish Government's Constitution and Cabinet Directorate. We'll get to the Constitution and Cabinet Directorate in a minute, because what on earth is that? Number 4, what is the annual budget for the department which is creating this? The Constitutional Futures Division does not have a divisional budget line. It operates within the overall Directorate budget. And then they go on to say, this is a formal notice that under Section 17.1, the Scottish Government does not have some of the information you have requested. So I guess they do not have the information about how much the Scottish Government's Constitution and Cabinet Directorate actually costs. And then 5, where does the money come from at source to fund this department, which is creating this Building a New Scotland project? And they answer, the Scottish Government's funding and expenditure streams are published in the annual Scottish budget and any changes set out in budget revisions. Well, that was not very helpful, because I looked into that all afternoon and I couldn't find out where the funding for the Scottish Government's Constitution and Cabinet Directorate comes from. Let's bring up the next photograph here that we've got. This is the Constitution and Cabinet Directorate. What we do, we coordinate policy on constitutional matters, elections and freedom of information. We are responsible for, and look at the second bullet point there, development and implementation of policy on constitutional matters. And it's run by those two headbangers at the bottom there, Angus Robertson and some unknown but very well compensated individual who I think is also an MSP. So they're running the Constitution and Cabinet Directorate, which will be a collection of civil servants tasked with those jobs, or rather those terrible projects to destroy our country. Constitution and Cabinet Directorate. So that's the collection of civil servants under that title who are producing the videos and the documents and so on, which will be messing up our country. And so I tried to find out more about the funding of that, and I couldn't. The best I could do was this next slide, and this is taken directly from the budget, which was published last week, and this is the Constitution unit, which has they call themselves the Constitution External Affairs and Culture Unit, and their budget is £347 million a year, which is a significant amount of money to try to destroy the United Kingdom, and it's significantly more than we've got. Okay, we'll keep looking at this, but all we've basically discovered is that they're admitting that they do have people within the civil service who are promoting Scottish government policies for independence. And do not be taken in by this idea that the £20 million that had been earmarked for a second referendum are now going to be spent on something else. You know, the work to destroy the United Kingdom was still continuing. There's still millions of pounds of our money going into these directorates, into these civil service groups who are following the direct orders of the Scottish National Party. And so it's all smoke and mirrors, really, at the end of the day. The 20 million will be spent continuing the major issue, which is, of course, that we have British taxpayer-funded civil servants working to actually destroy the United Kingdom itself. That's the issue which this British government does not want to grasp. That's the thorny thistle that the UK government is not willing to grasp. But we, unfortunately, just have to deal with that. We have to deal with that, and we have to go forward as much as we can. And in that regard, we have a crowdfunder running at the moment. It's going to be running until the 4th of January. It's a 28-day crowdfunder. crowdfunder.co.uk/AFFG 2023. Let's get that address up there on the screen. And we need a little bit of help with that. If anybody out there has got some spare cash, please do fire it in. We've got a lot of good rewards, which we'll get to in a minute, but I just want to talk about the severity of this. This is an article from the National. Major Independence fundraiser smashes through £100,000 target. Okay, this is from the Sunday National on the 11th of December, and they're talking about here a crowdfunder that's being run by a group calling itself Business for Scotland. Literally, this organisation is run by guys who have got as much experience in business as your pet hamster. And in fact, the only experience that they've ever had in business is they once wore a tie, okay, to their sister's wedding. That's the closest they've come, or perhaps one or two of them might have owned a briefcase or something like that. That's literally the closest any of these guys have ever come to like business. But they set up this organisation called Business for Scotland, and they've already got 100,000 in their crowdfunder, okay, which he said, he told the Sunday National, it's a tough time of year to raise money with tough conditions, the cost of living crisis and the Supreme Court judgment going against us. But I'm humbled by the generosity, and it's just in time for the campaigning database system and canvassing system to be set up. And apparently they've got some amount of money that they're going to spend on developing their database and so on. And apparently they need 100,000 for that, right? I mean, if we were developing a database, we could probably do it on about 120 quid. In fact, not even that, because you can get free database software. And I'd do the inputting for free, okay? So you don't actually need any money to set up a database system, but they're doing it with their 100,000. And you have to hand it out to these guys. I mean, if they can raise money like that, I mean, seriously. Anyway, we've got about 855 quid in the kitty, so we've got a little bit to go. But if anybody can, even though we know it's a tough time of year, if anybody can pop in a fiver or a tenner, please do so, because we've got some great rewards there. I'm just reaching down to get it. The way it works, go onto our crowdfunder, you can just send us a donation. However, if you want to choose one of the rewards, you can click on that reward option as well. Just check it out, folks, and let's see if we can bump those numbers up a little bit, because it was anyway the major way that we raised our funds for the coming year. So it's quite important in that sense. But thank you to everybody who's already helping. Now, we've got a guest coming up at the bottom of the hour, and I see he's already in the green room, so we'll bring him on just before the bottom of the hour. Now, before we go there, I want to talk about this day in British history, because if we don't know where we've been, then we don't know where we are going. And in fact, that's an important thing, because with our guest tonight, we're going to talk about the people who are attempting to befoul the name of our British heroes, and in particular Lord Nelson, because we'll be talking to Chris Brett, the Vice Chairman of the Nelson Society, on this very topic. It's going to be a very interesting one. If you're on TikTok, you won't be able to see the interview. You'll need to switch over to our YouTube platform, please. So on this day in British history, 4 years ago today, on the 21st of December 1988, that Pan Am Flight 103 en route from London to New York was destroyed by a terrorist bomb, and we know it as the Lockerbie bombing, which killed 243 passengers, 16 crew and 11 people on the ground in Lockerbie. A tragic day in British and indeed world history. And the age of those who died ranged from 2 months to 82 years old, and they were from 21 nations. And there's a memorial to them in Lockerbie, in Drivesdale Cemetery, listing all the 243 people there by name in alphabetical order. Has anybody been to that? I remember the night because at the time I was living in Castle Douglas, and Castle Douglas is about maybe 25-30 miles from Lockerbie, so it was just close by. So that's by far and away the main thing that happened on this particular day. Another thing that happened was a man died, and I don't know a whole lot about this bloke. I just noticed it today when I was doing some research. Named John Newton, who was in the Royal Navy for a period and was a captain of a slave ship, and he gave all that up when he had a Christian conversion, I believe, and he died on this day on the 21st of December 1807, and he is the man who wrote Amazing Grace, the song which was based upon his experiences about himself and how he came to see the world differently. So his name was John Newton, died on this day, 21st of December 1807, and that's a picture of him there. He wrote Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. A classic piece of Christian music. And he was born in Wapping in 1725. Becky says, lovely rewards. The wooden flags are amazing, aren't they just? Produced by Caelan Wynne of Dramatic Scotland Creations. He was on our show about 3 weeks ago. Harry says, if the UK were to break apart, would civil servants be getting a reduction in pay due to the cut in the economy of an independent Scotland due to not having the backing of Westminster and the British people? Well, hopefully that's not something we'll ever find out, Harry, because the United Kingdom is not going to break apart, because there are enough of us here who will absolutely fight for it. Democratically speaking, somebody that we're very pleased to have on the show, the second time that Chris Brett has been on the show. Now, Chris is the vice chairman of the Nelson Society, and the Nelson Society produce this regular magazine several times a year, and in it says, the aims and objectives of the Nelson Society is to advance public education in the appreciation of the life and achievements of Admiral Lord Nelson. That's a very pithy and satisfying mission statement, to advance public education in the appreciation of the life and achievements of Admiral Lord Nelson. We're going to be talking about that with Chris right now. If you're on TikTok, you won't be able to see this. Please switch to youtube.com/UK A Force for Good. Folks, please say hello to Chris Brett. Hello there, Chris.
Hi, Alistair. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine, and thank you very much for that. And yeah, coming through loud and clear. Now, this is the second time you've been on. You were on last Christmas at our telethon. We're not having a telethon this year for various reasons, but so glad that you could come back on. Now, last time we were on, we spoke about an attack that had been made on Lord Nelson regarding the claim that he supported slavery. And you looked into that in your capacity as Vice Chairman of the Nelson Society, yourself and your colleagues. And I know that the story has developed since then. And so I was wondering if you'd just maybe like to start with why is Nelson in this statue debate at all? Maybe perhaps recapping just what's happened in the press and those sorts of things. Just like to take that away, please, Chris.
Sure. The situation, Alistair, is that obviously Lord Nelson died in 1805, 217 years ago, and for 212, 213 of those years, there was never any suggestion that Nelson was involved in slavery or the slave trade or had any interest in it. The reason he is such an iconic figure is because of the battles that he fought in the Napoleonic Wars and the wars with the French. And that's why we have statues to him, streets named after him, places named after him. But about 5 years ago, a Guardian journalist, Afua Hirsch, wrote an article that accused Nelson of being a white supremacist, a racist, and in using his position, both as an admiral and as a member of the House of Lords, to, and I'll quote this, it's to perpetuate the serial rape and tyranny of the slave trade. So you can imagine that the Nelson Society, who were trying to put forward Nelson's achievements, as you so accurately described at the top of this, we were slightly horrified. There have been hundreds, if not thousands, of books written about Nelson, and that charge has never been levelled against him. Now, it seems to me that those are heavyweight charges, whichever age you live in, the perpetuating serial rape and tyranny and exploitation. So that was quite difficult for us to assimilate, to be quite honest. So I was charged with looking into this matter, and we wondered where the source of this thought came from. Now, I'll take you back a little bit of a recap on last year. You may recall, and I'm going to take you back actually to June 1805. Nelson is actually sitting in his cabin on HMS Victory. He's chasing the French across the Atlantic and to the Caribbean, trying to bring them to battle. As you know, we're back at war with the French, and Nelson was very keen to engage the French and destroy their navy. He chased them across the Atlantic, and he's pursuing them, but he hasn't quite caught them. On June the 10th, 1805, he's sitting in his cabin off Martinique, and he writes to a long-standing acquaintance in Jamaica, a Mr. Simon Taylor. And we'll hear more of him, but he effectively was a very wealthy slave and plantation owner.
Right.
And the letter was a private letter between Nelson and someone that he had met maybe 30 odd years before when he was serving in the West Indies. It was not for public consumption. And you may recall that Nelson had a way of dealing with those letters that he'd written to acquaintances privately. And that was to produce what were known as pressed letters. Now, this is an early form of photocopying.
All right. Yeah.
He would write a letter, and then he would place it on damp tissue paper, and then turn it over, and then place the tissue paper on a clean piece of paper, effectively giving us an early form of photocopying.
Goodness sake, yeah.
Yeah, so, but it was quite high technology for 1805.
It certainly was.
Yes. Now, if I can, I would just like to quote a little bit from the letter. In the letter, he says, "I ever have been and shall die a firm friend of our present colonial system. I was bred, as you know, in the good old school and taught to appreciate the value of our West India possessions, and neither in the field or the Senate shall their just rights be infringed, while I have an arm to fight in their defence," and this is the bit that's really interesting, "or a tongue to launch my voice against the damnable, cruel doctrine of Wilberforce and his hypocritical allies." Now, that has really been the source of discussion, I think, amongst academics.
Right, so
Why would he?
that's the letter that people are saying that he apparently wrote.
Yes.
Hmm.
Well, in fact, that's actually a quote, and I'll come on to this. That's actually what Nelson actually wrote.
Okay.
But what I would say is that's just been taken at face value by historians, and they've all said, oh, he was clearly racist, he was anti-abolition, and was pro-slavery. And on the face of it, it perhaps seems that sort of way. But that struck us as being very odd, because Nelson's actions, his relationship with people was one of great humanity. And there were no public pronouncements along those lines anywhere. So that letter seemed very much at odds with what we knew and thought about Nelson, and in fact what people have known and thought about him over 200 years. So it was clearly worth some investigation.
Yes.
Now, remember the date of the letter, June 1805. That was just 5 months before Nelson died for his country at Trafalgar. Okay, we can just roll forward a bit now, Alistair, to 213 years to 2018.
Yes.
A purported copy of Nelson's letter passed across the desk of someone called Martin Downer, who's a very eminent and leading specialist in Nelson artifacts. It was put aside as being a bit of a curiosity because the letter was clearly not in Nelson's handwriting. You remember Nelson lost his arm in 1797. So his initial copperplate handwriting was totally transformed with his left hand to, I think, something that my granddaughter described when she saw it in Portsmouth recently, saying, to put it bluntly, Nelson's handwriting wasn't very good.
Yes.
So there's a significant change. So this letter, written in beautiful copperplate handwriting, was clearly not by Nelson. And for reasons I'll explain, it couldn't have been made by his secretary either, because at the time the letter was written, his secretary had been killed at Trafalgar. Okay. This letter was written after Nelson's death, and it purported to copy his original.
Right. So somebody was trying to pass it off as a copy of the original. Well, that's a bit iffy.
It was what we would call in these days a forgery.
Yes.
They took his original letter, they wrote it out again, but they made some very subtle but very clear alterations, some 25 alterations to that original letter.
That's a bit cheeky.
Yeah. And why would you do that? Well, it's very interesting. You were talking about, was it John Newton just before?
Yes.
The dates are quite significant. This letter was published by William Cobbett in something called the Political Register in February 1807. Its purpose was to influence the debate on the abolition of the slave trade, which took place in February 1807. And why would the planters do that? Well, clearly Nelson had this astonishing and burgeoning reputation. He was the idol of the nation, and posthumously, he became semi-godlike.
Oh, yeah.
So the planters were keen to use his words in support of their case.
Right.
And they, by circulating this letter, not the original, they were able to suggest that Nelson was pro-slavery and pro-slave trade. So that was back in those days, that they thought that was a good thing, that would somehow help to convince the establishment that just keep on with this slavery and forget this trying to abolish slavery and the trade of it business, because that's that's not the right thing. Yeah, I get you. Put bluntly, if Nelson thought it was a good thing, it must have been a good thing, because he's now a godlike character.
Yes, yes.
So that was really quite interesting. But we then discovered that in the mid 19th century, other versions of this letter were published, and that led us to think, well, hang about. I think we actually found 5 or 6 different variations of the letter. So we were then thinking, which one of these truly reflects the original?
Of course.
And of course, the only way we could determine that was to see the original. That original letter has never surfaced, and my belief is that the planters who forged Nelson's original letter eventually destroyed it, because had the original come to light, the scope of their crime, for want of a better term, would have been discovered.
Yes, that makes sense.
So we then came across a reference to, remember I was talking about the pressed letter, the photocopy letter, Nelson's private collection, that actually ended up in the British Library. And we actually found a reference to it in a very important biography by Dr. John Sugden, in sort of a little footnote in the sort of 600-page book, which suggested it was in the British Library. Frustratingly, that discovery came during COVID. So here we are, desperate to see the original so that we can compare it with all of the other versions, but we're having to sit on our hands. So that was quite infuriating. However, late in 2020, we were able to look at that copy, and we found, as I've said, a number of changes to Nelson's letter. So we concluded that the first forgery, the first letter, the first copy letter, the beautiful hand-written letter, was actually a forgery. We then thought, well, hold on. Historians are taking forged versions of the letter that don't vary significantly in some areas, but they're drawing all their conclusions about Nelson's character from those forgeries. And any historian who researched this could find 4 or 5 public versions of this forged letter and would have noticed that there were differences. So I raised the question, why didn't they try to explain why these letters were different? Why just accept what they say? So that's really where we got to. And so we started to analyse the letter, and we came to the very, very clear conclusion that there was very little to support the contentions that Nelson was racist, that he supported slavery or supported the slave trade. We do have to remember. Sorry.
Good. I'm glad you did that particular research and setting the record straight, as it were. So, what's the situation at the moment as far as that is concerned?
Right. Well, you and your viewers are amongst the first to know this. We've actually turned up a second handwritten forgery based on the original letter, and it then was very clear to us that the planters were very strong in the way that they were defending the slave trade and slavery, and they were using forged copies of Nelson's letter. They were investing a huge amount of money in leaflets and pamphlets trying to persuade the politicians. They were very well organized, but these letters were in circulation, being sent, I think, to members of parliament to try and persuade them that Nelson would have supported the slave trade. And so we've got that second discovery.
Right.
There's also a further little discovery, which I'm hoping all will be revealed in a book on this in the new year. We also think that the king, or as he was then, the Duke of Clarence, the future King William IV, we believe that he was allied with the planters and was feeding them information, and maybe even feeding Nelson's letters to him back to them to use.
Crikey.
So, and now I'm probably going to go to the tower for this, because that's now a royal conspiracy, so please stick with me.
Yeah. It's not doing his reputation much good.
No, and yet he was quite a compassionate man in many other respects, but it was, he was very pro-slavery. He spoke in the House of Lords in favour of it.
Yes, I think that's been fairly well known, really.
Yeah. So the conclusion we reached is that the planters were well organised. They took Nelson's letter, forged it to use it to their own ends, and so that's really where we are in terms of what we know.
Good. Well, I mean, it gets all around, because here in Glasgow we had a so-called audit which was commissioned by the council, which is run by the SNP, and it was to look into every single street name and place and house in Glasgow, and how it related to. Now, this is the thing, not just how it related to slavery, which is one thing, but how it related to like the British Empire in general, and or what they call imperialism and colonialism. And that's kind of irritated me, because slavery is a different thing from the British Empire, or from the concept of imperialism or colonialism. And you could make arguments certainly for the British Empire doing a lot of good stuff, and imperialism and colonialism as well having its positive side to it, in a way that you couldn't really with slavery as such. But they were putting it all into one big bucket and imagining that they're all the same thing. So that was to the extent I could get involved in the debate, I was trying to point that out as well, that it's not right to do that. And I was involved in an online debate with the people in Edinburgh who were doing the same thing, and I did bring that up, saying, like, you can't conflate imperialism and colonialism with slavery. It's, morally, these are just different questions altogether. But they've got a political agenda, not just a historical agenda. They've got a political agenda well, what is it? It's essentially, in a way, it's just to kind of befoul the whole idea of the Union and Britain, and promote their separatism. Certainly, in my view, that's why they're doing it. But as going back to this Glasgow audit, I mean, some of the stuff in it was very interesting and raised facts that I didn't know about. But the person who wrote it, Stephen Mullen, he went along with this idea. He seemed, well, he did in the report. He accepted the forgery. I mean, in the 5 minutes that we've got left, do you want to just comment about that? Are you aware of that?
I am. Two very quick things, Alistair. You made the point about separating slavery, slave trade, and colonialism. That, if you remember the quote I read from Nelson's letter, he was very careful to say, I support our West India colonies. Mm-hmm. He didn't ever at any time say, I support slavery and the slave trade.
Absolutely.
William Wilberforce in Parliament wasn't trying to get the colonies abolished. He would like to see them operate through paid labour and so on, but the idea of the colonies was not something that was up for grabs. So I think they were capable of making that distinction. And you're quite right. It's wrong, I believe, in this day and age to conflate them. Can I just very quickly on that Glasgow audit, because I've got 3 or 4 very quick points I'd like to make on how you might deal with these.
Please do.
It was interesting that Stephen Mullen actually quoted, and if I can just quote this very quickly, I think all readers will be interested. He's talking about Nelson. He says, Nelson was, of course, a naval commander in charge of the British Navy, which included patrolling the West Indies and defending British possessions, and by extension, facilitating the continuation of chattel slavery. Now, as a matter of fact, that was wrong. Nelson was never in charge of the Navy, and by the time he was senior enough to chase Villeneuve across the Atlantic in 1805, he wasn't there long enough to patrol it and perpetuate slavery. So there were a number of factual errors that we pointed out to Dr. Mullen, and I will say he has graciously undertaken to investigate those further. But you're quite right. He was very interested in the fact that we highlighted the forgeries, and he's going to examine those. Okay,
that's good.
The interesting question, if I might, Alistair, for us, is how do we deal with these things? Because these attacks have been constant. You've got them in Glasgow. We've had them in Norwich, Nelson's home county, where people are making statements that become almost a conventional wisdom or a mantra, and they're so hard to dislodge. So I was giving some thought as to how we can address those issues. I suppose cynically, the first thing I might say is write a book. Get the line drawn in the sand. Sorry, I'll just get rid of it.
Well, absolutely. Information is what it's all about.
It is. Nelson had a great saying, which was, if you want to beat them, and he was talking about the French, of course, engage the enemy more closely. And I think this is what we have to do, is to keep engagement. You can write books and articles from a distance, but it seems to me we have to be absolutely sure of our facts, make certain that we're well rehearsed, so that we can counter these spurious misquotes, if you like, such as Dr. Mullins. We need to be able to challenge those, and we should challenge them. That's the next thing. You must challenge. I think offer to meet and sit down with these people and discuss. We've done that in the case of Norwich. We'll say, we'll come and talk to you. Let's put our evidence on the table. Let's see what you've got. Because Afua Hirsch in The Guardian has never made it clear why she said what she said. We've assumed it's the letter, but we've not heard anything. The other thing which you might be interested in, I wonder whether this is something you might explore. Goldsmiths College in London bought Dartmouth Town Hall, and it had 4 statues on it, one of which was Nelson. The students said, all these statues are associated with slavery, take them down. The college decided to consult on it, and they consulted in 2 ways. One was a postal consultation of the people in the neighbourhood, the local community, 58% of whom said, no, we want the statues to stay. So tapping what you might call the unengaged or disengaged is possibly something that we ought to think about. Secondly, there was an online consultation, and 85% of the people online, possibly a broader community, possibly including some of my members, for example, strongly agreed that the statues should remain.
Yes.
So Goldsmiths have said, that's what we're going to do. And they're going to try and take forward exploring this with the local community in the future. So engagement works, and engaging them more closely is the way forward.
Oh, absolutely. And when one talks about the students at a particular university, one has to remember that you're really only talking about a tiny number of the fanatical political sociology students who run the student union. I mean, when I was at university, I was involved in politics, and the people who ran the students' union, I mean, they ran it. There was only a handful, and when I say handful, I mean less than 15, maybe 12, and they were the crackpots, basically. And this was back in the 80s, and they could release press releases, and it would sound like all the students at this university were thinking about this and believed in that, when it was really just a majority of the executive that ran the student union. So it was maybe like 7 versus 5, of the 12 who ran it, and now it's suddenly all the students at the university wanting this to happen. The fact is, most students at university are just concentrating on doing their work, and they leave the politics to the freaks, basically, in many cases. That small group of people can change and have a huge influence upon the institution, whether it's a university or whether it's councils or cities or what have you. But I think the work that you're doing is amazing, and you really are. It's groups like yourself who are at the forefront of fighting back, because it's not as if the government of the day, which in some ways is actually responsible for what's going on, but it's not as if there's all these grand institutions out there who are standing up for our British heroes. Sure. It's just small groups of people such as the Nelson Society we here in Glasgow and in Scotland with a Force for Good and the people who support us, and other little groups like Peter Whittle's New Culture Forum, groups like that. It's just small groups like that who are doing the best that we can, as we always say, to keep the British end up. So we've come to the top of the hour, and I'm afraid we don't have any more time left, but this has been a really very interesting conversation, and I'm glad that you're fighting back. You mentioned there that some kind of book is coming together on this?
Yes, I've almost finished. It's really, I see this as being Nelson's final battle. the battle for his reputation. And what we intend to do is to publish the research that we have. It's a challenge to the historians, and to say, look, if you still believe what you've said, bring forward the evidence. We've got evidence to the contrary. Now it's up to you. So hopefully in the early part of next year, we'll be getting that out in the public domain.
Well, that would be fantastic, and we'll definitely have you back on to show that particular item of work. That's a very valuable piece of history. I'll just leave the final comment here to one of our viewers. Says, a well-trained historian. In a world of sound bites and social media where people believe what they want, we need to consider actual sources or lack of them. 100%, Paul.
Good sentiment from Paul.
Good. Okay, well, thanks very much for being on the show, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Brett of the Nelson Society. We've been putting up your website, which is nelson-society.com. I'd encourage people to go to that. It's a membership organisation. You're always organising events around about Nelson, as well as publishing an incredible. Is it a quarterly magazine?
Quarterly journal, yes.
Yeah. Well, the amount of work that goes into that, it's fantastic. It's as good as you'd get from any university. In fact, probably a lot better than you'd get from universities these days. Good.
Very kind of you to say so. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Chris. Have a lovely evening. Have a Merry Christmas and a great, productive 2023.
Thank you for having me, Alison. A Merry Christmas to you and your viewers.
Thank you. Good night.
Cheers.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Chris Brett of the Nelson Society. Now, Stuart says, fascinating subject. It absolutely is. Paul Hadlow says, a real high-quality guest. Richard says, reform the whole education system has become a source of indoctrination. Why is that? Maybe partly because of the rejection of Christianity in the 60s onwards. That leaves a religious, spiritual and moral vacuum which 2 or 3 generations down the line can be replaced by secular religions and worldviews. And that's absolutely correct. And for example, today we saw that Gender Recognition Act. That would never have passed if we were still a Christian society. That's simply a result of the atheistic worldview that we live in, but that's moving to another thing. Folks, we have our crowdfunder running at crowdfunder.co.uk/AFFG 2023, and times are hard and we know that, but if you've got a few pennies to spare and you can get it our way, please consider doing so. And we will use it to fight the good fight with all our might in 2023 to keep this great nation together. Now, we're not going to be broadcasting next week, but we will be back the week after, which will be the 4th of January 2023. And so it just remains for me to wish all of our viewers a very happy Christmas and a great British New Year. We'll see you again on Wednesday, the 4th of January 2023. God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next year.